Hi everyone. Hello. Hi everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I am Sawa from Oki Islands. I am your host today. So I'm here living in Oki Islands, right by the ocean today. Do you see? Okay, it's a sunny day today, but still very cold. It's winter time in Japan. So let me introduce myself first. So I am originally from another part of Japan and moved here for a few years ago, actually from Singapore, where I lived for 5 years. So I know today we have some participants from Singapore. So hi there from Singapore. Okay, so I work for what's called the Oki Islands UNESCO Global Geopark, and I am in charge of sustainable tourism as well as conservation and education. We are really happy to have this opportunity today to share about our special islands with you. Thank you very much. So our program today is 1 hour. Alice and Kit will present for 45 to 50 minutes, and we'll have about 10 minutes at the end for questions. So, okay, let's start. Alice-san, please join me. Alice.
I thank you very much. And welcome, everyone. We had over 350 people from around the world join us to sign up for this presentation, and that's really amazing. Kit and I are delighted to have this opportunity to share with you a place we both really love, the Oki Islands. So I'm just going to get my slides going here. What I'm going to do is give a general orientation explaining what the Oki Islands are and where and what they're like, and then I'll turn things over to Kit, who will tell you about an emperor who was exiled there and Waka poetry. So let's get oriented first. Here's Japan. And now we can see the Oki Islands. They're located in the Japan Sea off the western coast of Japan and are part of Shimane Prefecture. In total, there are 180 small and large islands that make up the Oki Islands, but only 4 are inhabited. On the left, you see a group of 3 islands, which are collectively called Dozen, or the Dozen Islands, and the larger round island to the northeast is called Dogo Island. According to Japan's creation myth, which is described in the, I'm just going to get rid of this, I think maybe my screen's in the way there. Is that better? According to Japan's creation myth described in the Kojiki, Japan's oldest written record, when the gods Izanagi and Izanami got together, notice my air quotes, they gave birth to 8 islands that make up the Japanese archipelago. Oki was their third-born child, which makes them pretty important in terms of Japan's mythology. The other story, I'm not having, my slides are not advancing now. There we go. The other story, that told by geologists, is that the Oki Islands were formed by a combination of movement in the Earth's crust, which pushed up the land, and volcanic eruptions that occurred about 6 million years ago. Now, despite being remote, these islands were not isolated. In fact, they have a rich and very long history of exchange with other regions on the mainland and even other countries on the Asian continent. For example, from archaeological findings, we know that even in the Stone Age, early people were traveling back and forth to the Oki Islands in some kind of primitive boat to collect obsidian, which is a very hard glass-like rock that is formed by some volcanic eruptions. And early civilizations discovered that if you chipped this just the right way, you could make tools like knives or weapons like arrowheads. And this was important because steel hadn't been invented yet, so it was worth a dangerous ocean crossing to collect obsidian. Much later, as Japan became a sort of nation, the Oki Islands were important because of their connection to the imperial court in Kyoto. In the Nara period, which is the 8th century, the Oki Islands were designated as what's called a Miketsukuni, a supply province chosen to provide various marine products such as abalone and wakame seaweed, which were taken to the imperial family and its court in Kyoto. And these were used in rituals for the protection of the nation. So that's another way in which Oki was quite important. Now, that was a close tie, but Oki was distant enough from the capital in Kyoto to be selected as a place of exile. Banishment was quite a common punishment in Japan at that time, and there were other islands used for exiling people too, but Oki was reserved mostly for nobility and other high-ranking officials because the island had a stable economy and plenty of food, which means that upper-class exiles could serve out their sentence without real hardship. Later, during the Edo period, Oki became an important port of call for trading ships. A new type of ship called the kitamae had been invented, and by the middle of the 19th century, the technology was advanced to the point that a ship could make multiple trips in one year from Osaka to Hokkaido, stopping at various points along the way to conduct trade. The Oki Islands were an important port of call where ships would stop to replenish supplies, water and food, and wait for favorable winds. In the busiest years, there might be as many as 4,500 ships coming to anchor in the Oki Islands, so things were pretty bustling. So how about transportation today? How does one get to the Oki Islands? There is an airport, one airport on the larger island of Dogo, but there are no direct flights from Tokyo. It is possible to fly from Tokyo, but you have to go to Osaka first and change there to the little puddle jumper plane. I've made that trip that way, but I think the more enjoyable and interesting way is to do what Kit and I did last November when we were preparing for this presentation, which is to take the ferry. We chose to fly from Haneda Airport in Tokyo. You can go to Yonago, which is the little red square at the bottom of my map. We spent a day there and then took a morning ferry to the Oki Islands. We had beautiful weather, really lovely weather. We spent the whole time out on deck watching the beautiful scenery change, and it was a really enjoyable way to make the journey. Our destination was Ama, the square in the middle of my circle, on one of the Dozen Islands, Nakanoshima. And there are two reasons that we headed there. The first is Ama is where the emperor spent his exile, and there's a shrine there dedicated to his honor. So this was the obvious place for us to go to follow his history, which was our main purpose. The other reason is that there's a new hotel in Ama, and we wanted to check that out. I've actually been following the development of this hotel for a while, so I was really excited to do that. This hotel is, in fact, quite a development for the Oki Islands because up until this hotel opened, there really wasn't a great choice of lodgings on the islands. The only choices really were to stay in one of the aging hotels, usually government hotels that were in need of an update, or to stay in what's called a minshku, which is very simple Japanese style lodging. You're staying in somebody's home with a shared bath and sleeping on the floor. And that's a great option for budget travelers, but for someone who's looking for a little more comfort and style, there hadn't been any options. So this new hotel, which is actually a new wing on an existing hotel, is called Ento. And Ento means distant island. It's a very old word. And the new wing is called Nest, and it certainly is very cozy and attractive. What's interesting about this hotel is that when it was in the planning stages, the town made a conscious decision not to bring in an outside chain or a hotel management company, but to manage it itself with local control, local people, and local flavor. And as is fitting for a hotel in a national park and a geopark, is that the hotel emphasizes natural materials and also aims to be environmentally responsible. Look at that view. That's the ocean right outside the hotel. That was the view from my room. And what you're seeing there is not just any ocean view, but it's actually a caldera. So you may remember from geology class that a caldera is a bowl-like depression formed when land collapses after a large-scale volcanic eruption. The magma chamber empties out and the land above it collapses and creates the caldera. Some examples you may know from Japan include Lake Ashino in Hakone, right by Mount Fuji there. Also in Kyushu, down the southern end of Japan, is Lake Aso. Now, these are calderas formed in land masses, but the caldera in the Oki Islands is a caldera in the middle of an ocean, and that's quite unusual. Oh, I forgot to mention Crater Lake in Oregon. That's another famous example. But again, these are calderas that are formed in land masses, whereas the Oki one is in the middle of an ocean. They're quite unusual in the world and something that's kind of interesting to see. This is what it looks like from a higher point. Very beautiful. The coastlines all around the Oki Islands are beautiful, particularly on the outside edge of the caldera where the coastlines are exposed to wind and waves. This is the very dramatic coastline on the next island over from Amma, and Kit and I went there and went trekking. And, I say trekking, but it's not at all a difficult hike. You can choose to do it so that it's all downhill, which is what we did. And you can be rewarded with amazing views all along the way. Sorry for putting myself in the photo here, but I think my pose really expresses what it feels like to be up there. It's just really, once you start walking from the drop-off point, you can have a taxi drop you off. There's just nothing. There's no signs. There's no guardrails. There's barely even a trail, and there's nothing between you and nature. However, as you go along the way, you do meet many interesting friends of the island. These are the famous wild horses of Oki. They're not really wild, but they do graze freely, and they're not at all bothered by people. So you can, I took this photo, I think, or one just like it. It's really very beautiful. There are also free grazing cows there. These are destined to become Oki beef, a very delicious type of Wagyu that's hard to get anywhere else in the world. Towards this beautiful geological formation is towards the end of the walk. Very beautiful. You can see there was nobody else there when we were there. Very lovely and a nice walk that I certainly recommend. And you can have a taxi waiting at the end to pick you up and take you back to the ferry. Another interesting excursion that you might take is to go to the next, the smallest of the inhabited islands, Chiburijima, where there's this amazing red cliff formation. And everywhere in the Oki Islands, the geology tells you a lot about the world's history. So even if you weren't interested in rocks before you go there, you will be interested by the end. The specific location and geology of the Oki Islands has engendered some very unique forms of culture there. One interesting thing is what's called bull sumo. It's a type of bullfighting where the bulls fight each other. They're not killed or hurt, but this is very popular on the island, very important part of the local culture. Another interesting aspect of the unique culture there is a type of sustainable agriculture involving a type of crop rotation that has been practiced for centuries, and it's quite interesting. But now I'm going to turn things over to Kit so she can hit another point of culture, which is Waka poetry. So take it away, Kit. And while she's getting her slides ready, I just want to tell you that the beautiful photographs that you'll see on her slides were all taken by her on our trip. She's quite talented. Okay, I'm done.
Oh my gosh, that was fantastic, Alice. Thank you so much. We got a great lay of the land, and I have to thank you in particular for introducing me to these beautiful islands. So now I get to tackle the subject of Waka, and it's a difficult subject. If you ask the average Japanese person on the street, what is Waka? They will shrug and try to get away from you, probably. And this is partially because the word has two meanings. Waka is a term which covers all Japanese poetry, but it's also a specific form. And it would really take me about an hour to define that form. But let me give you some of the basics, and then I'll circle around to why I'm even talking about Waka in relationship to the Oki Islands. Now, Waka are made up of 31 on, which are Japanese sounds that are arranged in phrases of 5, 7, 5, 7, 7. And it's important to note that on, that word on, are not syllables, but rather distinct sounds in Japanese. So what's the difference between on and syllables? Let me give you a sample. Let's take hiking. That's a word that's used both in English and in Japanese. And in English, it has how many syllables? Hiking, 2. But in Japanese, that word has 5 on. Ha, I, ki, n, gu. Each sound is counted. So for this reason, most modern translations of waka and haiku into Romance languages do not try to mimic the 5-7-5-7-7 format in English, because that would result in poems that need extraneous words to sort of fill out the syllable count. So despite what early translators provided, waka in Japanese doesn't rhyme. In fact, waka poets avoid rhyme as much as they possibly can. It's actually seen as a poetic flaw. So it's a non-rhyming 31 on length poem. But they do use something called kake-kotoba. That's the word that I've highlighted in red there. And these are words that can be used with several different meanings. They're called pivot words. And their use is often an homage to an earlier poet's work. One example might be the word matsu, for example. Matsu means in Japanese, if you write it in hiragana, you're not sure whether it means pine tree or waiting. And waiting is usually for a lover. So you have an awful lot of waka that have pine trees or people waiting in them. And it's kind of a secret way to suggest I'm waiting for you, for example. And I like this example because in English, the word pine also has pivot possibilities, meaning both the pine tree, but also to languish with longing. Now, haiku was derived from waka's first 3 lines. But where haiku is all about restraint and keeping yourself more or less out of the poem, waka are passionate, expressive, intimate, sometimes even confessional. Now, you might ask me, how passionate are waka? And Japanese are not known for being passionate in their expression generally. But take a look at this. So intensely do I feel love now that in the lily seed dark night, my robe I'll turn inside out and put it on. Whew. This was written by Ono no Komachi, a poet from the early Heian period, who lived from about 825 to 900. We're not actually sure of those dates. But like many waka, we can read this and get it even today. Here, you can see our lovesick poetess is so infatuated that she wants to turn her night clothes, which presumably she's just worn during a tryst, inside out to be closer to what lingers in the fabric. That's a pretty hot thought, right? Now, if you have read The Tale of Genji, then you know that waka poetry could make or break your love life, because writing back and forth between lovers was expected and skill levels mattered a lot. So if you were a lazy poet or had clumsy handwriting, it would be a big turnoff. So it's no surprise, I suppose, that waka became really important. Now, I'm going to go backwards just a little bit and let you know that the earliest waka, which remember I said covers all Japanese poems, were found in the Kojiki and the Manyoshu. And they came in several different forms. But during the Heian period in the year 905, Emperor Daigo commissioned a large collection of waka in the form that I explained earlier of 5-7-5-7-7 phrases. And this gave the form great prominence. You know, it was tapped by an emperor after all. Emperor Daigo collected both old and new waka and named an anthology the Kokin Wakashu, which means the anthology of ancient and new poetry. And by the way, if you see the word shu at the end of a book title, it means usually collection. Now, Go-Toba was the 82nd emperor of Japan. He lived from 1180 to 1239, when poetry had really become a serious part of life for all court and government officials, or actually nearly anyone in the public eye. Waka were written to celebrate births, to mourn deaths or lost love, to announce important events, or of course, to initiate and end relationships. One's learning, cleverness, human qualities, and observation skills were put on display. Emperors were naturally expected to excel at Waka. This imperial connection with Waka continues today. The Waka are featured at the annual Utakai Hajime, which is the imperial family's New Year poetry reading, which is televised live each year, and which includes poems selected from public submissions. The Waka are arguably the most popular form of poetry in Japan today, read by millions in daily Japanese newspaper columns, but they're still hard to define. I'm going to go to Go-Toba now because he's very important in this story. He was, by all accounts, a lively and sociable man and an excellent poet. He sponsored a staggering number of poetry contests as soon as he retired his reign. And he retired his reign at the tender age of, are you ready for this? 18. This was not by choice, but the Kamakura shogunate was in power at the time, and the rise of a strong young ruler was really not in their game plan. They didn't want an imperial ruler of this strength. So they took the rule from Go-Toba and gave it to his son, a toddler at the time. He was about 3, I think. Go-Toba kept a close eye on his son and sort of could rule through the son, as often happens, but also busied himself with plans for a new collection of Waka poetry meant to update and hopefully surpass the Kokin Wakashu. Now here you see 2 images of Go-Toba. You can see that he was depicted as a full-faced man with sensitive lips and rather kind eyebrows. Commissioning and editing the Shin Kokinshu, which literally means the new Kokinshu, Go-Toba gathered and worked with the most famous poets of his age, including Fujiwara Teika, with whom he had a very pronounced love-hate relationship, which would really make a great topic for another presentation. What upturned Go-Toba's perfect life was his bid to wrest back power from the Kamakura military shogunate. He wanted to forcibly reinstate imperial rule in Kyoto. His secret plans were discovered by the Kamakura shogunate, and Go-Toba was exiled to Nakanoshima for life. His sons as well were dispatched to other islands, and he never saw them again. It might be hard for us to grasp the shock exile would have been to Go-Toba. He was to lose his beloved social circles, the familiar bustle of court life, the regular meetings with his poetic comrades. It's almost unfathomable. A lesser man might have perished from this. But as he was crossing the sea of Japan to the Oki Islands, which usually took an entire day, the weather grew really bad, fiercely stormy. Go-Toba wrote this waka. You're just going to have to listen to it because I'm not putting it on the screen. I am to be the new warden of this isle. Upon the seas around Oki, oh, wild winds, blow with care. Given that the Japanese word for warden can also be translated to mean God, the poem sounds defiantly brave. I am to be the new warden of this isle. Upon the seas around Oki, oh, wild winds, blow with care. Go-Toba and his entourage landed at Nakanoshima's Miho Bay at dusk in the town of Saki, no doubt completely soaked from their voyage, only to find no residents prepared to board them because this is not where he was supposed to land. He was actually quite far south from where he needed to go. But just imagine this scene that you see in the slide here at night 800 years ago. Ultimately, the ex-emperor was directed to spend his first night in a thatched roof shrine on a nearby promontory. Can you see it? Maybe not. I put the word Tori there though. But just imagine trying to find this at night after passing through a terrible storm. So Mie's shrine today has a tile roof, but in the day, the roof was made of thatching. The grounds still feel remote and slightly forlorn today, and they are virtually invisible from the harbor. On the grounds, you can find a stone carved with a waka that Go-Toba is said to have written that night as the moon emerged above him, so far from the capital. How ephemeral life, gazing at the moon through the eaves of a humble thatched roof. I feel no one knows what will befall us. How ephemeral life, gazing at the moon. Through the eaves of a humble thatched roof, I feel no one knows what will befall us. I think you can hear in these words a distinct change of tone already. There's a wistfulness and a gradual understanding of his new circumstances. So Go-Toba and his entourage then are supposed to have hiked through the wild mountainous terrain to find the family who were to host him, but also, of course, ensure that he did not escape. You can gauge from this shot what great resolve it must have required to hike through these woods 800 years ago. It doesn't look like it's changed all that much, actually. The coastline entrance to Ama Town's harbor, too, has barely changed from the way it might have appeared to Go-Toba. To us, it's a glorious place to vacation, but of course, Go-Toba saw it through different eyes. Now, Go-Toba's lodgings they don't exist on the island any longer. They were said to have been in an area known as Kata on Ama Town. And the site was, up until the late 1800s, Genpukuji, a temple. Some sources say that he stayed in the temple at first, and others that he had completely separate quarters. In any case, the family that was put in charge of Go-Toba's welfare was the Murakami family. This is the Murakami-ke, or the former house of the Murakami family. And from it, we can perhaps extrapolate that Go-Toba's living circumstances were on a par with the island's best. This, of course, may have made him feel even more isolated at first. One of Go-Toba's waka, actually one of the approximately 700 that he wrote on the island, suggests that at least the entranceway to his residence was nice. As the days go by, in fine profusion grows the moon seed. No one comes to my fine wooden door. Moonseed is also known as yellow perilla or wild grape, and its seed looks like a tiny crescent moon. And it's also quite poisonous. So that might suggest why no one was coming to this particular door. But it also might have suggested Go-Toba's feeling of isolation or perhaps even depression. And however fine his front door may have been, he often felt, like actually many of us do in traditional Japanese buildings even today, the persistent cold. Think of this: beneath this robe of moss thick with dew, I lie in lonely wakefulness, enduring night after frigid winter night. In this work, and in most waka, when you read that something is wet with dew, it means soaked with tears. And robe of moss could perhaps be read as mildewed cloth. We're not really sure, but it certainly suggests that Go-Toba feels, to put it in modern terms, like dirt. The Murakami house is open to the public. Its displays are actually not very elaborate, but this one really caught my eye. This is a leather kemari ball. And kemari is a game popular among courtiers, or it was a game popular among courtiers, not today. And it's something like soccer practice, where you pass the ball around between players without letting it touch the ground. It's kind of like a giant hacky sack. Go-Toba was extremely fond of this sport, and all sports actually. He loved hunting and archery. And it seems that the sport would not have been actually widespread on the small island before he arrived. He probably brought this with him. So I think this might be the most tangible item, aside from his last will and testament, his swords, and his waka, that connects us with Go-Toba, the man. And I hang on to this image as some kind of proof that he didn't ever entirely lose heart or give up his sense of fun in life. I mention this, of course, because most of the poems we have from Go-Toba's time on the island are laments. One of the most important collections of the ex-emperor's waka written while in exile is the Ento on Hyakushu. Remember what shu means? It's a collection, and in this case, it collects the 100 poems that Go-Toba wrote on Nakanoshima. This is a printed version of his waka displayed at the Emperor Go-Toba Museum on the island. The museum has really fascinating displays related to the emperor, including the kinds of Japanese swords that Go-Toba was passionate about forging. There's a real hunger for information about Go-Toba, but in fact, very little remains. Nonetheless, the occasional legend pops up, born of imagining his life on the island. This is a pond located in the vicinity where Go-Toba lived. A local legend claimed that Go-Toba wrote a waka complaining about being kept awake by frogs in the pond, and that from that day on, the frogs went silent, which makes him sound like the god of frogs or something. However, most islanders who have studied his writing are doubtful about the whole story, from the origin of the waka to the mute frogs. They have rejected that legend, although I haven't heard any frogs sing at this pond. Nonetheless, many in the imperial family, right up into our era, have come to pay their respects to Go-Toba here. You can find carved stone pillars around this pond commemorating their visits. At this point, I have to admit that nearly every poem in Go-Toba's on-island poems are of the jukai variety. And jukai is a recognized category of waka, which focuses on topics of memory, complaint, or woe. So you would think that Nakanoshima Islanders would feel a little depressed by this fact, right? Oh, here's that collection of poems about how lonely our island is. Well, it seems that most islanders were and are understanding of his plight. The current slogan of the island itself is Nai mono wa nai. Nai mono wa nai, which can be interpreted as what we don't have, we don't have. But it can also be interpreted as we've got it all. Kind of interesting. I think perhaps Go-Toba came to feel the same way about this island. Between his complaints, we can also find the ex-emperor's gentle observations of the people and customs of the islands. The work of islanders caught his eye. Between his self-pitying poems, he observes locals gathering herbs and tending fields, bulls frolicking in the fields, and fishermen at sea. These are things you can still see today. This is, without doubt, the most recited and beloved waka on the island today. Taking the evening cool, the blades of reeds are tossed in the approaching waves. The fireflies' number grows, fishing flares of the sea folk. This is a poem of sheer pleasure and an appreciation of the island's magical scenery. The fireflies that gradually grow in numbers are, of course, the tiny fires set by fishermen in their boats to attract fish, bobbing on the waves. By the way, blades of reeds is a very common kakekotoba in waka, dating back to the Kokin waka shu. Myriad birds chirp in the skies, unchanged from what they always were. Yet this spring of my own life is something completely new. In this work, the suggestion is even stronger that Go-Toba has come to accept his new circumstances. We can imagine him gazing out on the sky full of birds and thinking of Kyoto far away but accepting that his life will be something different now, something new. Recent scholars have suggested that during his 19 years of exile and before his death at age 60, Go-Toba's life was not too terribly changed from what it would have been in Kyoto. He spent his time, we surmise, playing sports, hiking the island, forging swords, holding poetry contests, and re-editing the Shin Kokinshu from afar. In some respects, it might not have been so different from his Kyoto life, and yet it was also fundamentally different. It's impossible to reframe this difference, this state of exile. Oh, it is possible, excuse me. It's possible to reframe this difference, this state of exile, as incredibly important inspiration for Go-Toba's work, the truly deep and sad material of life he might not have had otherwise. It gave him very genuine emotions. Take this work, so profoundly dark and yet true. My time has come with those still in the world on which I have turned my back. About what would you now sing, mountain nightingale? There comes a time when all of us wonder, how will the world go on without us? What songs of our life will remain? In the island's Emperor Go-Toba Museum, we can find a valuable facsimile of the ex-emperor's last will and testament, sealed with his two surprisingly large handprints in red ink. Not blood, as I first thought. A little gruesome idea, but I was glad to learn that it's ink. His body was cremated here, and this site is noble and solemn. It's really profoundly peaceful beneath huge pine trees. I doubt that anyone who visits this site will leave unmoved. There's just something about it. Oki Shrine in Amatown was constructed to enshrine Go-Toba's spirit 100 years ago. It's a lovely place to go to. Today, with the help of a guide, you can ask Alice, me, or anybody on the island, you can arrange to write and dedicate your own waka at the shrine, where it and your name will be blessed by the priest of Oki Shrine. I stayed at the island's amazing new nest wing of Ento, which Alice showed you, and I took this shot of the night's last ferry, and then I dozed off. I woke before dawn the morning of my departure to see this remarkable sight. The one amazing thing about the hotel is it doesn't put anything between you and nature, so you can take a photograph like this from your room. I attempted a waka. I don't know how good it is. As the autumn moon sets behind Oki's mountains, dew settles on these sleeves I fold before my voyage deeper into your songs. So I look forward to learning more about Waka. I'm a relative novice at this form, but in preparing this, I had wonderful help from several translators and from the lovely people in Amatown and Alice herself. So I have to offer great gratitude and thanks. So now we come to a time when we have some ability to answer questions. I hope you'll have a little bit longer than I expected because I zapped through this speech really fast. So we'll have about 15 minutes to answer your questions, and I'm going to turn the screen over.
Okay, thank you very, very much for your wonderful presentation. I've learned a lot. So I see we've got some questions already.
Okay.
And if you'd like to ask something else, and please click on the Q&A mark at the bottom of your screen, and you can type your question. Please feel free to send to us. So, okay, let me see. Okay, here says the question: how much time would be ideal for the Oki Islands? Okay, what do you think? Do you want to answer this one, Alice-san?
Well, I think it depends on how much time you have. The more time you have, the more you can explore. But I would say an absolute minimum of 2 nights, 3 days. But I would say 3 nights, 4 days would be much more comfortable. And I think on one of my trips, I was there for 4 nights, 5 days, and we were pretty busy hitting all the main sites. So it's really up to you. One thing to keep in mind, though, is that whether you fly or take the ferry, sometimes bad weather can cause the ferries to be canceled. If the ocean's rough, they won't go. So you need a little bit of flexibility in your schedule. It's better not to have absolutely fixed plans for when you get back, but usually they're pretty good at predicting when that's going to happen because they can do amazing predictions on the weather now. I'll stop. Thank you.
I thank you. Here is something similar question. So I want to Alexander to continue answering. So here says, when is the best time of year to visit the islands?
Well, again, I think that depends on what you want to do. Spring and fall in general in Japan are great seasons to visit because the weather's usually nice. Summer is high season in the Oki Islands because people like to do water sports like snorkeling and scuba diving and swimming in the ocean. There's some beautiful beaches. I think the only time you might think twice about coming is winter. So sort of, well, Kit and I were there in, what was that, mid-November that we went. That was fine.
Yeah.
It was lovely. We had great weather.
Well, the big secret about Japan is that November is fantastic. It's not what we think of generally, at least in America. It's still warm. Leaves are just changing. It's absolutely splendid time to come.
I like December too because often there are beautiful flowers still blooming and good clear skies. Maybe avoid January, February. That's kind of the
Right.
season when you're most likely to get rough crossings.
Or June. June is a little bit rainy too. So those are the little ones that would give me hesitation.
We do have a rainy season that usually runs from the middle of June to the middle of July.
All right, thank you. So here is other questions. Actually, I'm getting a lot of questions. Thank you, everyone. So here says, what is the best way to get introduced into Waka? Any books that you would recommend? So this one should be by Kito-san.
Okay. That's actually a difficult question, but I think what I would start with is something, I would look at the Shinko Kinshu probably. There are several translations of it that you can find. The one by Laurel Resplica Rod is probably one of the best. She's a relatively new translator, but she really gets Waka. So Laurel Resplica Rod. Remember that name. You can also just Google it, really. Just look online and type in Waka, and you'll find a wide variety of translations. And I think translation is key. When you find a translator that you get that sort of rings true to you, follow that person and see what they've presented of Waka. You can also find collections of Waka. You can I guess maybe the hyakunin issue is probably the most popular way people get introduced to Waka. And hyakunin issue is a collection of 100 famous Waka poems. And almost everybody in Japan tries to memorize them. In fact, there's a game where you put out the cards and the first half of the Waka comes up on the card. Or the second half is spread out and somebody reads the first half and you have to snatch away the second half. And it's a fabulous game. It's really fun to watch, but I can't ever imagine playing this game successfully. Japanese are so fast at it. And the card literally flies out of the room. They snatch so quickly. But I guess I would start with the hyakunin issue. It's a fabulous collection of poems. I think you'll really love it.
Right, nice. Thank you. And here is another question about the Waka as well. So how difficult is it to learn to write your own Waka? What is important to know when trying? I love one you wrote in the hotel.
Wow, thank you. I actually am not on solid ground when I talk about Waka. I'm a haiku poet mostly, so to open the gates of emotion and write Waka is not natural for me. So I'm still working on that form myself, honestly. I think that to remember nature around you is key. And I think also to ask yourself what you're really feeling at the moment is also important. So it's actually very similar to Western poetry in many respects, except that the nature element is really not an option. It must be part of your poem, because that sensitivity to nature, traditionally anyway, has been very important to Japanese people. I would say get a group together, start writing them and see what works. That's what people have done through the ages. That's what we should do too. Send me one if you write one. And thank you very much for the compliment. I'm a little embarrassed, but thank you.
Right, cool. Okay, another question is about Go-Toba. So one question, there are two kind of similar. One is, did Go-Toba's son write Waka and continue his father's legacy? Is there any information about his wife? And
Well,
right, then the another one said, what happened to his son after that?
well, he had I think several sons, but the ones that were in line to take over from him were exiled to Sado Island and another island. I forget the name of it. Do you remember, Alice, by any chance? No. Okay. They were isolated to separate islands. And I think that there is some suggestion that Go-Toba wrote to his sons back and forth, which caused some confusion. Who wrote what Waka? That it's not absolutely certain because we don't have a huge collection of the letters. So I believe that probably his sons wrote as well. But to be honest, I have never seen those Waka. I can't point to one and say this was Go-Toba's son's Waka. But I simply cannot imagine, as I imagine you cannot either, being separated from your children for the rest of your life. Now let's get to the fun part of the question, and that is what happened to his wife? Well, emperors and a lot of important courtiers during this time had several wives. There's the primary first wife, and then there are the additions. They're sort of like lovers or entertainers or other people who caught the emperor's eye. This was not it was not considered wrong or bad, but sometimes you might want to do it in secret to protect feelings of your primary wife or your secondary wives. It's a little confusing. If you read the Genji Monogatari, you get a sense of how common this was. And Go-Toba apparently came to Nakanoshima with various dancing girls that were his lovers. And beyond that, I don't have so many details. I would love to know, though.
Okay, right. Then another one. Okay, may I know where can I find the original version in Japanese of Waka shown in the presentation? It is a bit hard to find it by Googling the translation.
I think if you just
If I
Google
can just
Waka.
if I can just interject for a second, the same questioner asked later, let me rephrase my question. May I know where I can find the original version in Japanese of the Waka shown in the presentation?
Well, there are several places where you can find it, but Dr. Macaulay, who I've put as a translator in my slideshow, has many of his Waka translated. And on his page, he has the original Japanese as well. And if you go to the Go-Toba Museum on Nakanoshima in Amacho, I think they have collections, several different collections of his work in Japanese. It's quite difficult to translate because the Japanese is old style Japanese. It's not as simple to do as you might think. At least it wasn't easy for me.
Okay, we're going to send out a follow-up email to everybody with a link to the recording. That was another question that came up was, you know, I missed the beginning. Can I see a recording? So we will send you an email and we'll put a link to Dr. Macaulay's page in there. So for people who really want to go deep into the original Japanese.
All
And we'll
right.
send some other links too, like tourism links and things like that.
Okay, cool. Right. And here another one. Okay. Aside from Go-Toba history, what other things does Oki have that we cannot find on other part of Japan?
You want to answer that one, Sawa?
Onegaishimasu.
Well, I think, I mean, okay, so apart from Go-Toba, the Oki Islands in general are really interesting in terms of geology. And as I said before, I came to the islands with no interest in geology and no background. I never took a geology class, but it really is fascinating. Nature there is quite unusual. There are some plants and animals that only exist on Oki because it was separated so long from the it was originally part of the continent, but the animals and plants evolved separately. That's very interesting. Nature is absolutely beautiful. The food is really interesting. Lots and lots of seafood is available. I find the bowl sumo really fascinating. I got to attend it's not a tourist attraction. It's very much for the local people. They have a tournament up in the hills, and it was really fascinating for me. I went there with a friend I was traveling with, and we just spent most of the day watching the people, and everyone was very friendly. Everybody makes towels to support their local bull. So I have all these towels with the bull's name on them that I brought home because they gave them to me very generously. And I shared some sake with the mayor of the town. So the bull is very interesting, I think. Anybody want to add to that?
Yeah, sure. The scenery is absolutely stunning. First of all, you're absolutely right about that. The people are so kind. It gives you the sense of the way a small town would be, in that everybody knows you're there, and if they like you, they might pick you up in their car and take you somewhere. I got invited to judge a heifer beauty contest. And this went really well, and I was enjoying myself until one of them peed on me. So that was not so great, but something like that you wouldn't see anywhere else. And that people were laughing about it and loving it and asking you to join was fantastic. I haven't felt that in a long time. So that's precious. The island really has about 2,000 people living on it. That's right. Is that correct?
That's one island you're talking. You're talking about Nakanoshima.
I'm talking about Nagamura. That's right. Other islands have a bit. Some of them have more. Some of them have less. But yeah.
I think another interesting thing, and Sawa is a perfect example of that, is that the islands have been attracting quite a number of young people to move in from other parts of Japan. So on the one hand, there's a very old culture with people who have lived there for generations and generations, and then you have these young people coming in. And this is important because you do have everywhere in Japan depopulation of the countryside and also an aging population, so you're losing population. And the local high school, for example, if you're living on an island, you only have so many children, right? I mean, with the population declining. And the high school was in danger of closing because they didn't have enough students. And if the children had to go to the mainland in order to study, well, then their families were going to go with them, and then you're losing your prime workers. You're losing parents in their 30s, for example, 30s and 40s. So the island set up a system where students could come in from other parts of Japan to attend high school in the beautiful and interesting location of the Oki Islands. And I think about half of the students now come from outside and live in dorms. And so there's a real vibrancy because of this exchange program, and the kids are quite involved. There's a local championship who's really good at kendama, a traditional toy, and she'll come to the hotel and give you demonstrations if you like. I think that's probably enough on that.
Thank you for mentioning about myself as well. So actually there are some questions about me. So it's one says asking me if I'm living here for full time, or like if I have any views on increasing tourism in the Oki Islands. Thank you for asking. Yes, I am living here full time since 4 years ago. Then actually I married to the local people who's a carpenter in the island. So now I live here. Then as I mentioned earlier, I'm working for the geopark. Then actually I'm here, as you can see, it's as you see nice view, right?
Mm.
Also, I'm inside of the hotel room, Ento, right now. It's a sweet room.
Nice.
Yeah,
Waiting for Go-Toba.
yeah. You, everyone.
Just
Yeah.
move the camera back and show them the little balcony again. There's this little inner balcony right there. You see with lounge chairs. That far view is outside, sort of semi outside. It's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have one of those in my rooms.
Next time. Yeah, this is one of our try to increase the tourism because in the last time we didn't have much different types of accommodation. It's like a Minshuku style or ryokan style, but we didn't have like a kind of high-end hotel. But this time we tried to open up the hotel, like a rebrand the old hotel to the newer version to enjoy the scenery. Yeah,
I think it's also important to let people know that everybody on the island is invested in the hotel too, to some degree. So that's very unusual. Usually a company comes in, slams down a hotel and takes the money away from the community. This is really a community project. Is that correct? Yeah,
yes.
I think that's pretty special. Could I jump in just for 1 second, because I've seen Margaret Chula has mentioned something that I should have introduced immediately and explained, because tanka and waka are used interchangeably today, even though tanka means short poem, but it also means modern day waka. And the Tanka Society of America has a fabulous website. And if you go to Tanka Online and you're interested in writing this form of poetry, that's the best place to start. Thank you, Margaret. Sorry about that.
Right, thank you.
There was also a question about food. How is the food in the hotel? And that's actually a big point of pride and effort in the hotel. There's a young, vibrant kitchen staff, and the food is, I don't know, it's not your typical ryokan food. It's more like fancy Japanese hotel, Western, semi-Western, sort of like a hybrid, but you do get a little piece of oki beef with your dinner and local vegetables. We had carrot soup grown by a German who lives on the island who does organic carrot farming, and it's high-end, nice food and nice sake list and local beers and things like that. It's fun.
Right. So I'm afraid that all the time, this is all the time we have. So we are going to close today's webinar. But before I'm going to close, Alice-san, Kit-san, do you have any comments you want to add on?
No, just
Oh,
that,
just go to the islands. Go, go, go. Definitely. You'll love it.
And we really appreciate that everybody came to spend their time on their Friday night or Saturday morning with us. We're really grateful.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Okay, so I'm sorry if we didn't answer your question. So we recorded today's webinar and we will be posting the recording on YouTube in a few days. So we will send you that link as well as other links for information and email address if you want to contact us to ask something. So yeah, there are so many questions, and also we've got a lot of thank you very much comments. They say everyone said it's a nice presentation. Thank you very much, Alice and Kit again. So thank you. Yeah, thank you very much for your time today. Please come visit us in Oki Islands. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your time.
See you in Oki.
Yep.
Come to Japan. We hope the borders will open soon.
Oh boy, yes.